Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Fuller, and I am a media officer with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a webinar on the report just released this morning titled Enhancing EPA Science Capability for a Complex Future, Recommendations for the Use of the Title 42 Special Hiring Authority. You can download a copy of the report and other supporting materials at www.nap.edu. A recording of this webinar will be available in the coming weeks on the National Academies website. For those of you not familiar with the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, we are private, nonprofit institutions that provide independent, objective analysis and advice to the U.S. to solve complex problems and inform public policy decisions related to science, technology, and medicine. For each requested study, panel members are chosen for their expertise and experience and serve pro bono to carry out the study's statement of task. The reports that result from the study represent the consensus view of the committee and must undergo external peer review before they are released, as did this report. We have members of the committee here with us today to discuss the report, but before I turn it over to them, I want to go over a few reminders. Please note that this webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour. We'll start off with a presentation summarizing the report, and then we'll open it up to any questions that you may have. To ask a question, simply click Q&A at the bottom of your screen below this window and type in your question. You can submit a question at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Now I'll pass it off to Natalie Armstrong, a program officer with the Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology. Off to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you to everyone for connecting to the public release webinar today for our report on EPA's Title 42 Special Hiring Authority. My name is Natalie Armstrong. I'm on staff at the National Academies and served as the project director for the study that resulted in this report. And I just wanted to quickly begin our session with some important acknowledgements. First, I would like to extend my special thank you to the committee members for their service and for their great efforts in making this report. The report also underwent a rigorous review process, and so we thank our volunteers who served as reviewers. I would also like to express my appreciation for our National Academies team members who served as staff on this report. And lastly, I would like to thank our EPA sponsor for their support. So once again, thank you all so much for joining this public webinar. I now will pass it off to Dr. Tom Burke, who served as one of our committee members who helped author this report and who will be delivering the briefing slides on behalf of our chair, Dan Greenbaum, today. Off to you, Tom.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. And as we put the slides on, I just want to thank the committee for being here. I'm speaking on behalf of our leader and chair, Dan Greenbaum, who was unable to be with us today, and the committee. It was truly a great experience and a privilege. So we're here to talk about an evaluation of the Title 42 Special Hiring Authority and enhancing the EPA science capability for the future. Next slide. Now, the new report is just released today, and the committee was sponsored by the Environmental Protection Agency. At the request of Congress, this evaluation took place. So next slide. I want to give a shout out to our committee members. I mentioned Dan Greenbaum, our chair, but there you see our committee, and it's actually a tremendous committee because of its breadth of experience, but also because several of us had the opportunity and the privilege of serving on a previous report on the future of science at EPA. And our report today really builds upon recommendations from that report. In order to face the future challenges of environmental protection and environmental health, it's really important that EPA be able to maintain the workforce, to look toward the future and have a pipeline to that future with the best and brightest scientific expertise. Next slide. I want to thank the staff. You heard from Natalie, but what a terrific group put it all together. And also, Hannah mentioned the peer review process, we were very fortunate. Sometimes reviewing reports, scientific reports, can be a thankless job, but we were very fortunate to have incredibly high caliber reviewers with great experience in science leadership positions, including at the agency, and they surely strengthened our report. Next slide. Now, our statement of task really kind of sets the stage for what the report will be all about and how we will go about our work. So I won't read everything. I'll just try to hit the main points from the slides here today. But basically, our task was to review the Office of Research and Developments, that's the science branch, the science and research arm of EPA, utilization of the Title 42 hiring authority during the past decade and currently, and recommend how EPA could improve the utilization of this program. In doing this, we were asked to consider changes that may increase the efficiency and effectiveness, and consider future use for the recent expansion of Title 42 authority to the Office of Chemical, OCSPP, the Office of Chemical Substances and Pesticide Programs. Next slide. So continuing on with the statement of task, if you can go back one slide. As I mentioned, next slide. We're looking at the EPA's use and the potential impacts. So we were looking at, since 2006, the implementation by EPA and the impacts of that authority on the agency and, quite frankly, the field and advancement of science in general. And importantly, our work included consideration of how other federal agencies use Title 42 programs, to learn from them, learn from the best practices, to look at past reports and analyses. We had great presentations and documentation from EPA on their impact and on their approaches, and to evaluate the EPA's mission and broader topics and how this fit together. Next slide. So the report is organized. It's a brief read, so don't be overwhelmed by numbers of pages and things like that. But this is an overview of the organization report. I just want to point out we evaluated the implementation, but we also took a look at impacts and the path forward and the importance of Title 42 for the future of environmental protection, not just at the agency, but for the nation. Also, there's lots of interesting data in there on the range of things that may impact the workforce at EPA, including budgetary information and the utilization and expertise that the program has brought to the agency. Next slide. So what did we consider? Lots of National Academy studies begin with an enormous briefing book and a very rich scientific literature to evaluate for the committees. But this being a little bit different because we're looking at a hiring authority, we were really focused on two major reports. One is a previous report, also mandated by the Congress, on the use of Title 42 authority that came out in 2010. I was honored to serve as chair of that report, so it was very familiar to me, but that was an evaluation from 2010 we were looking at. But also, as I mentioned, a number of our committee members also served on a more recent 2023 National Academies report on transforming EPA science to meet today's and tomorrow's challenges. This was a very forward-looking report, thinking about the challenges we face in a changing world. And it obviously made lots of recommendations about the kinds of expertise and the approach to strategic planning for the workforce. Other materials we looked at included EPA's operations manuals, their mechanisms for bringing people on board using Title 42, the employment statistics since the beginnings of the EPA program, and descriptions of the current and planned positions under Title 42. And then importantly, as I mentioned, practices by other federal agencies, specifically the National Institutes of Health, Centers for Disease Control, and FDA, and how they implement their Title 42 programs. Next slide. So what is this all about, Title 42? Well, first of all, let me say that EPA has an outstanding scientific workforce. It is a science-based agency, and EPA and the Office of Research and Development have been at the forefront of environmental science for the nation and for the world. So the large majority of folks at the agency are not Title 42, but as the science evolves, clearly there is a need for new specialties, for new mixes of expertise. And Title 42 authorizes federal agencies to appropriately appoint very highly qualified scientists and engineers outside the standard civil service positions. Next slide. Now, a little bit of detail on the personnel strategy here. For those of you in academia, it's kind of analogous to the ranks and the hierarchy of research and science in universities. There are 4 categories of Title 42 positions. Creatively, A, B, C, D, right? But staff scientist, which serves as independent researchers, kind of the I hate to say junior, but because they can be incredible leaders in the field, but independent researchers and team members. Senior scientists are expected to be lead researchers and project leads and really have very specific high-level research responsibilities. And then C and D are the leadership positions, the science leaders who manage or supervise very high-level research studies or regulatory reviews. And then the senior scientific advisors provide high-level advice and assistance and management of science. So there you see the hierarchy and the different types. That's important as we look at how the program has been implemented and the future plans. Next slide. We also reviewed the Title 42 Operations Manual, how EPA has structured going about the salaries, the recruitment, the review of the program. And we looked specifically in this manual for things like salary competitiveness, the methods for hiring, recruitment, and selection, and the overall program, how it's evaluated. Next slide. So this slide, bear with me, it's a busy slide, but I think it's really terrific because it gives a really good overview of the program of Title 42 since its implementation. So let me start with the 2 donuts there, the circles of different colors. Now, as you might imagine, there are many evolving challenges for EPA and constantly a need for new programs. And when Title 42 was first implemented with the authority being granted in 2006, it was very important on that donut to the left there. You see there were certain areas, computational toxicology, public health, and homeland security and remediation that were really essential to build capacity. And in the early decade of the program, you see that the bulk of the science positions under Title 42 went for those programs, and there was a focus on leadership and senior scientists. Now, there were also a few, and you see other areas, including the inner office of the assistant administrator. There were single leadership positions that utilized this. But as the program evolved, and if you look at the plan for the future and currently how it anticipates the positions will be used, there's a much greater distribution of the positions throughout the entire realm of science being conducted by the Office of Research and Development for Homeland Security, for water resources, for air, climate, and energy. And it's in a stage now where the foundation has been built and the programs are expanding and filling critical needs. Now, on the right-hand side, just to give you an idea of the kinds of scientific specialties and the expertise of appointees, we present examples of the tremendous variety and important nature of the science for the appointees. And they range from exposure science and data science to climate, environmental justice, as I mentioned, computational toxicology and genomics, and ecosystems. Remember, the science of EPA really runs the gamut from the protection of the environment and ecological sciences to the human health sciences and toxicology, but also all of the behavioral sciences, communication, and complementary sciences that are part of the systems approach that guides the agency. Next slide. So to give you some examples of the program, we had a tremendous session where folks came and talked about their work and Title 42 appointees. And it has clearly enabled the agency to recruit innovation leaders and to address many of the program needs. So they're just like, won't read the whole thing, but you can see that Title 42 scientists have been in the forefront of our national response to the challenge of PFAS, the fluorinated compounds that are ubiquitous contaminants of our environment, our water supplies, and our foods, issues of biosolids, and they're also assisting with the implementation of the Toxic Substances Control Act with cutting-edge computational toxicology, understanding the broad range of health effects from environmental pollutant exposures, and developing new ways to monitor and identify contaminants in our environment. So again, just as the other list showed the tremendous range of expertise, the implementation of the program has brought and solidified that expertise, that capacity for the Environmental Protection Agency. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned, we looked at other agencies to see just how they have implemented their Title 42 authority. The National Institutes of Health is the largest Title 42 program, and they have almost 4,000 scientists in Title 42 appointments, holding a real variety of basic scientific research and clinical positions. And the structure is modeled to be similar to the different levels that I pointed out for EPA. The NIH, National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, is closest in size and approach as an environmental research organization. And so we took an especially good look at how things are run over in NIEHS in the National Institute of Health. We looked at key programmatic differences, for instance, in salaries, in the placement of Title 42 position around the agency. We looked at the full range of appointments, including, and I didn't mention on that four-tiered strata there, the postdoctoral opportunities, but NIH and NIEHS uses the program to provide postdoctoral opportunities for developing scientists and have a good pipeline for future leadership. And we also looked at how they go about their term lengths and their renewal procedures for renewed appointment in the Title 42 positions. Next slide. And now to our findings. First, and since that 2010 report was such a strong one, I think it's important to know that and a positive report in 2010. The committee's findings are consistent with those of previous reports, including the 2010 National Academy report. And in the next slides, I'll be presenting our recommendations, which reflect what we have learned and the best practices of other agencies as we did our evaluation. Next slide. So these slides are busy. I'll try to be efficient in going through, and I'm going to focus on the blue boxes, which present our recommendation. But first and foremost, we concluded, and it's a consensus report, that EPA has implemented its Title 42 program in a well-organized and effective manner, and it has laid things out with their operations manual and their procedures, and it has brought to the agency, and really to the nation, scientists who are working in all priority areas, conducting high-level research, developing new tools, and providing technical assistance, not just to the programs in the agency, but to the states and public health agencies on the front lines of environmental challenges. So our first recommendation is that the Environmental Protection Agency clearly has used its authority well. And as with other federal agencies that I mentioned, Congress should grant EPA permanent Title 42 authority. Right now, the authority has been renewed every 5 years. But there's always that sense of being tentative and concerned about the future, because EPA right now lacks permanent authority to use Title 42. Next slide. We also, taking a look at how others have implemented it and the tremendous success, recognize that right now there's a very limited number of Title 42 positions that are authorized. Only 2.6% of the Office of Research and Development workforce are Title 42 hires. So we're talking about a very small percentage of a Office of Research and Development that has over 1,500 employees, 75% of whom are involved in scientific research and scientific activities. So that 2.6% is small, but they've had tremendous impact, advancing innovation and providing strong scientific leadership. And so we feel that as part of our report, another important recommendation, our 4.2 there in the blue box, that EPA should have the authority expanded to allow the number of Title 42 hires to comprise more than this small percentage of the workforce. And that in addition, we now see there's been an expanded authority that includes the Office of Chemical Substances and Pollution Prevention. In addition, there should be consideration given to using these really important Title 42 positions in the other agency program offices and even perhaps the regional officers to support science-based decision-making. But importantly, there shouldn't be a fixed number so that this expansion comes at the expense of the research capacities of ORD. Next slide. Next, we talked about strategic planning. And one of the hallmarks of the Futures report, I'll call it, the other National Academy report that several of us served on, was the need, as we face the science challenges of the future, for strong strategic planning. So we called on really a Title 42 strategic strategy to go along with the current EPA strategic planning process, so that there be identification of hiring categories and appointments as part of the strategic planning. This should include scanning the horizon with foresight planning that thinks about every 5 years what the deliverables will be and how Title 42 planning, scientific leadership workforce planning will be an essential part of the strategic planning of the Office of Research and Development, and that it be a part of the anticipated deliverables to reflect the new directions and priorities of ORD and the agency. We also felt like national program directors and center directors should be on an annual basis called upon to provide their input in planning how the positions will be allocated. Basically, an inclusive, open, strategic approach to planning for the Title 42 workforce. Next slide. Now, you remember I presented the 4 levels of positions for Title 42, and so recommendation 4.4, we made a recommendation that as the program has matured, you see the evolution away from just a focus on scientific leadership and management toward filling the research positions with scientific and technical personnel. And we recommend that the majority of the new hires, the majority of the folks brought in on Title 42, be researchers, scientific and technical personnel. That a smaller number of the hires be senior science leaders and management, such as the national program directors. This has been an essential part in the future. But that also Title 42 positions really be strategically designed to look at the entire pipeline and development of leadership capacity in science, to include postdoctoral and young professionals, the assistant professors, the postdocs of the world in academic jargon, who very often have that cutting edge science as they come out of their educational processes and their research. So we felt assuring that pipeline by considering the use of appointments for postdoctoral and early career scientists is very important too. But we also recognize that Title 42 plays an important role in addressing those unforeseen needs. Certainly in my experience with the agency, the Title 42 leaders were very important in addressing issues such as our drinking water infrastructure in the wake of the Flint crises, and the evolution of our knowledge and understanding PFAS and the widespread contamination to toxics in our environment. Next slide. We also focused on the hiring process. Now, there's 2 approaches to hiring, competitive and non-competitive hiring. And we felt it's very important that this be a credible, competitive process. And we felt that although there will always perhaps be a need to bring in folks strategically to address specific emerging needs, that the best way to maximize recruiting of highly qualified candidates, that the program would be well served by an approach that had mechanisms for identifying candidates and assuring the integrity, openness of the process. And so recommendation 4.5 really says EPA should define, spell it out, how they decide for competitive versus non-competitive hiring. That non-competitive hiring should be used sparingly and on a strategic basis, because it may be antithetical to the appearance of fair and unbiased hiring process, and it could undermine the equitable hiring process, but also undermine the credibility of the process should there be critics of it. So we recommended that most, if not all, of the positions should be competitive. Next slide. Now, we also looked at salary caps. Frankly, many of the areas that are so important to the future of science, think about artificial intelligence, its application for environmental protection and public health protection. Think about big data, think about geographic analysis, as well as things like exposomics and high-level computational toxicology and the computational sciences, as well as the behavioral sciences. These are new for the agency, and these are positions, and this is expertise that is in demand. So EPA has not revised its Title 42 salary cap since this program began. Now, we're not recommending that everybody make this highest salary cap, but that it be there as a tool for recruitment of the best and the brightest, just as it has been changed in NIH. So we really feel that EPA should think about adopting the salary cap that is used in NIH's Title 42 program. And a higher salary cap may be needed for engineering and data science professionals if warranted by the market analysis. Frankly, to make EPA an attractive option for the best and the brightest, we need to be competitive with salaries. Next slide. We also talked about the process and the transparency of the process and getting the best, and made a recommendation that this should include search committees. For most recruitments, using a search committee would ensure the broadest possible outreach. And so, just as was recommended in the 2010 report, we recommended that the EPA establish a search committee for available positions to facilitate open recruitment, to promote equity and transparency, obviously to evaluate the applicant's credentials, and to recommend the most qualified applicants to the agency. We also felt the search committee should include members both within the agency and outside. Next slide. And then there's program review, which is what we were doing. But clearly, good programs can always be made better with review and evaluation and recommendations for improvement. So our recommendation 4.8 was that regular program evaluation and performance measurement are critical to informing decisions and communicating the impact and effectiveness of the program. And EPA should arrange for a review of its Title 42 program every 5 years by a third party. Now, we suggested perhaps the Office of Research and Development Board of Scientific Counselors. Obviously, the Congress has called upon the National Academies in 2 instances to evaluate the program. But that independent review is an important part of continuing the excellence. And these measures will assure that EPA can identify the successes and communicate the impacts of this essential program. Next slide. So in conclusion, I'll end with this slide. The Title 42 program was created to attract highly qualified individuals in the roles of science and engineering, and to really assure that EPA maintains its place on the cutting edge of environmental science. The program has been successfully implemented and has facilitated the appointment of very highly qualified individuals, and they've contributed tremendously to the agency's ability to address the mission of safeguarding health and the environment. Given the imperative for environmental research to address emerging complex problems, Title 42 really stands as a cornerstone in fostering scientific and engineering leadership nationally, but also internationally. The program's continuity ensures that effective support will be provided to address the nation's future environmental and public health challenges. So I'll end there, call upon my colleagues on the committee if they have any comments, and we'll have a question period now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. Like Tom said, we're going to open it up for our Q&A portion. So if you have any more questions, I'm inviting you to add them into our Q&A box that should be right underneath the webcast on the website. So please submit your questions so we can make sure they get answered in the next 25 minutes. And I'll get us started and get us started with our first question from the Q&A portion. So pulling it up here. So our first question is, did the committee have any thoughts on where EPA should direct Title 42 hires within the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention? So that's OCSPP. Did the committee have any thoughts on Title 42 hires within that office?
Well, I'll start. First of all, this is new, and OCSPP is in the very early stages of developing their own strategy, both strategic plan and operations manual for this, and so we feel the benefits of the program that we've seen in ORD would clearly be very similar in OCSPP. It's one of the parts of the agency where there is not just acute needs for high-level science, but a tremendous volume of requests and a tremendous range of potential challenges in toxic substances and in the pesticides program. So we anticipate that OCSPP, uh, learning from this report, learning from the experience of ORD, would have very successful implementation and obviously a potential for very high impact for the new leaders on the programs of this office.
Great, thanks. And if any committee members want to jump in at any time, feel free to unmute yourselves and go for it. Our next question. Oh, yeah. Hi, Linda.
Yeah, just totally agree with Tom. But I think another point we made is that we feel that this is a really successful and important program, and frankly, should not just be an ORD and OCSSP, but should be extended across the agency where there's, high-level scientific activity going on.
Right.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Our next question is, how does the committee envision the potential impacts of granting permanent Title 42 authority to the EPA?
Well, again, I'll take a first stab and invite others. Imagine you're the manager of a National Football League team, and you really want to draft and retain the best athletes. Well, and that's a simplistic way to look at it, and guys get accused of using the sports analogy all the time. But you want the agency to have the best available tools to develop that pipeline and to make sure you're competitive with the market, and you provide a career pathway that makes it attractive to be part of EPA. And that's what the committee is calling upon. We feel that there's been tremendous success in the agency, but that the challenges, if you look at the 2023 report, are really unprecedented. And we're recognizing that the more traditional areas of expertise in pollution control and environmental science have tremendously expanded to include the social sciences, the geography, and sensors and big data and artificial intelligence. And if we are going to maintain any kind of competitiveness for this tremendous expertise that is needed for the future, it's absolutely essential. So we anticipate that it would be great to see the recommendations implemented, that there be permanent authority granted and extended authority. We don't see it replacing the civil service, the traditional workforce, but rather providing a really good complement to that, so that there are those opportunities to build in new directions. And it's an essential building block, just as we feel other science organizations are now faced with the same kind of challenges. And this provides EPA a way to maintain its cutting edge position in science.
This is Anne, and perhaps what we can add to that is that having permanent authority would make it easier to recruit the types of high-level talent that the agency would really need, that Tom was just talking about. Because if you have a program that's renewed every 5 years and you're potentially renewed every 5 years and you're in, say, year 3 of that program, trying to hire someone and say, well, we can guarantee 2 years, but after that, we'll have to see. makes it a lot harder to get that kind of high-level talent that you're really looking for. So if we're really serious about wanting to provide that for the agency, to be able to take on all of the challenges that we're looking forward to in the next 5 to 10 years in the environmental and health field, you need to be able to assure that your new hires that they can maintain a career once they switch to the agency.
Yeah. And I can speak to that firsthand. As we recruit at Johns Hopkins, we try to assure a career pathway for excellence that goes through the tenure track ranks. But imagine being one of the best and brightest coming out of a great graduate program and being told, we really need you, but we're not really sure if we'll need you beyond 5 years. And it depends upon the Congress, and there's a constant process of concern and reauthorization. So I can tell you that's not going to recruit many tenure track great scientists away from the academic setting and into EPA. And we've seen the tremendous success that NIH and CDC and other agencies have had with that more secure permanent authority.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Anne. Our next question is, how would you prioritize these recommendations in the report?
Wow.
And Tom, you can pass it off to somebody else if
Okay,
you
I'll be happy to pass off if we have a raised hand, but in a sense, we have prioritized in the presentation. Now it's all important because you need a good process, you need competitive and transparent, and you need a credible process. But we started off with permanent authority because we think that might be the weakest link now, to have that uncertainty really affects everyone making their career choices. So in that sense, permanent authority was important, but we also know that retaining folks really depends upon them having a career pathway that includes knowing that there might be salary increases that would keep them competitive. You think of why scientists might leave the federal government. Well, luckily, having served at EPA, I realized that most of the EPA scientists are incredibly committed to the mission of the organization, but at some point, they should be compensated fairly for their market value, and they should see an increase in their earnings that reflects their increased contribution to science and their expertise growth. So we really feel that having a fair career path is also important. So I think that is also essential. But I'm not sure if the question also meant, well, what priorities, what areas? But if you look at the priorities for expertise, again, we are not talking about revamping the civil service system, and there are great scientific positions that are a part of that system at EPA, and folks who have gone through the ranks and are now in the senior executive service. And we feel that's terrific for leadership positions and high-level management positions. But for that specialized expertise, we feel this should be a priority. And we leave it up to the agency through their strategic planning process, as we recommended there, that the leadership of EPA, identify those key areas to define what expertise we need to build. The Academy has given suggestions in areas of new technology and new information sciences, but really the challenges we face shift constantly, and sometimes in emergency response, there's a need for quickly being able to use an authority like Title 42 to bring on the expertise that's needed. So we did try to look into the future, but what we felt most important is that there'd be a solid, well-run program that guarantees a career pathway to the best and the brightest, and that the priorities will constantly be shifting, but that EPA manage that through a solid strategic planning process to meet the needs of the environment and environmental health. And any other comments, please?
Yeah, uh, so I want to emphasize the point Tom made. I think especially if you look at the technology development and especially data sciences and other things happening now, it's hard for us to predict actually what's going to happen in 10 years. So I think it's a really good idea to use this opportunity to build a capacity building in a way higher in combination with the idea of giving permanence. And then you can hire people who are very productive in academia type of people to make a commitment, especially to stay in a place like this, and then you build their careers and then do new things. At the same time, we also have in this salary cap recommendation will help us to actually recruit in industry, because to keep up with some of the new upcoming area, we need to catch people in industry who are committed to the cause of what EPA is doing and get them, and they know they can join EPA, and then they can build their careers and do new and exciting things with the vision they may have or with the type of drive they have in industry.
And Title 42 has enabled in its history the recruitment of some very high-level scientists from industry that really enhance the capacity. And I know from experience, as we face a shift in energy and the threats of a changing climate, there will be constantly evolving expertise. And perhaps traditionally, we did not have a lot of expertise in the agency on oil and gas exploration, for instance, or in alternative energy and the impacts of developing that. And in any big environmental policy shift, there are trade-offs. We need scientists to help us understand the true range of environmental and public health trade-offs as we move forward in making decisions for the future.
And our next question builds on that. So thanks for setting me up, Tom. Our next question is, could you all elaborate on the need for Title 42 appointees in fulfilling critical emerging research areas? What are those research areas? And can you touch on the need for both scientists and engineers?
Yeah. So first of all, it's important to recognize that we are casting a broad net, and it is science and engineering. Solutions to environmental challenges are totally dependent on my engineering colleagues, and we work very closely together in the agency, with the agency and the scientific community. So if we think about that, well, the emerging challenges, I wish that they were 40 years down the line, but they're upon us right now. They're upon us as we read today's newspaper about the changing climate. They're upon us as we respond to critical climate events in emergency response. They're on us as we think of transitions in our energy supply, whether it be in our vehicle fleet and the shift toward electric vehicles and the related need for mining and resources and the trade-offs and the environmental impacts there. Virtually every decision we've ever made about an environment has needed an evaluation of the health and ecological impacts as well as the financial impacts. So as we really begin to take a look at the full system of our decision-making about the environment, and we think perhaps with much more foresight about the long-range impacts of our decisions, we will need scientists that can address every aspect of the environmental systems that will provide us guidance for sustainability in the future. And I know that sounds like a lofty academic answer, but setting priorities for that clearly, when it was a pollution-specific agency and we needed folks on very specifics of engineering for traditional drinking water disinfection, we knew what we were doing. And we drew upon engineers who were absolutely terrific. But think of the challenges of drinking water scarcity, drinking water quality, drinking water supply now, and all of the disciplines that go into that, as well as the translational aspect of that, because we're at a time when there's lots of questions about science, and pushback on the scientific community because of public lack of understanding, mistrust of the scientific aspects of decision making and the impacts of policies. So full range from law to engineering to communication to big data sciences. So top priority. We put it forward for the agency to put its collective heads together, perhaps with bodies like this, to help guide us in the future. But the challenges are there. They're certainly emerging, and there are unforeseen challenges as well.
With my engineering bias and a background, I think to answer that question, the important thing is that, I mean, like Tom said, the science should develop, that the engineering develops in parallel mostly. And then with engineering, another dimension of engineering, now with the whole issue of technology development and technology and computation areas. Right. So these areas will have, again, like I said earlier, we need to be visionary in the thinking in some of these areas, because the technology, as the technology develops, engineering itself will change. A good example, if the AI, the way engineers, way we design things are going to change, how we design things anymore. So I think that will be applicable to the type of challenging problem with the EPA, including, for example, climate change. How do you bring climate change? Then you have big climate model projections and sensor technologies. How do you incorporate sensors at different levels to this decision process? So those are the new areas, in my view, will have a lot of potential.
And this is exciting. The potential is tremendous, but it's also more essential than ever that EPA have a full toolbox and all the tools necessary to develop that workforce.
Awesome. Thank you both. In our last few minutes here, I would love to call on each of the committee members that joined us today. I know there's a good number of you here in the Zoom room with us, so I'd love to hear from each of you. The report came out just a couple of hours ago. Some people maybe have read the whole thing in that time, but most people are just taking in the report, getting time to digest it today. This webinar maybe was their first time that they're seeing the key messages from the report. So I'd love to hear if there's anything else that you'd like to highlight before we wrap up this webinar, or any key messages that you really want to make sure that people walk away from this report. So Linda, let's start off with you. I saw you unmute yourself.
I think Tom did a fabulous job, first of all, but I do want to say, I think what this report says, this is an incredibly essential program to the science of EPA, and it needs to be made a permanent program, not something that is up every couple of years. I would take that as from me, the take-home message.
Paula, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Again, I agree with everything that Tom said and Linda has said, and I just want to, again, the need for a permanent program that's essential. And then because what's essential is EPA has to be nimble. We don't know what's going to be the next environmental disaster. We don't know. We just don't know. So we have to be EPA has to be well positioned to, if they need to call on scientific expertise that is outside of the agency, to bring in that expertise and those people in a good way. So this is a really important report, and I was honored to serve, and I hope the recommendations are adopted. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to go next. This is Idan Dion. I'm with IBM. And first, Tom, thank you for doing all the lifting today. Let me just say, it's been a privilege for me to work with the colleagues on this report. They have tremendous amount of experience and tenure within the government, so they really understand the challenge. As someone who comes from a private sector, I would say formalizing Title 42, making it permanent, it's so important for EPA or for any government agency if you want to be able to compete for talent. right? So EPA has to compete with private industry, with anyone for talent, and we want EPA to succeed. And I think this report provides a roadmap, right? It doesn't do all the work for EPA, but at least put them on a level playing field to be able to attract talent. And I think that's what we want. As citizens, as someone who works in the private sector, someone who works in the public sector, we want the best to have the ability to see the job, see the availability, and compete for that.
Great.
Anne, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, again, my thanks to Tom for doing such a great job in explaining and summarizing the report to everybody. I think you just really hit the high points and did a really good job with that. So thank you, Tom. And certainly agreeing with the idea of permanency, but also the importance of expanding this program. So certainly having a small cadre of the high-level experts in the Office of Research and Development has been a great help. It helps with the agency to also be able to reach out to colleagues outside of the agency and get expertise through collaborations in that way. So we mentioned that in the report, but I wanted to highlight that as well. But bringing really strong scientific expertise to the regulatory side of the house would also enhance EPA's capacity to be able to use science-based regulatory approaches and to work with and communicate well with industry about the need for those types of regulations. So I really wanted to bring that out as well, and to thank everybody for the opportunity to be part of this group. It's really been a wonderful committee, so thank you.
If you have the time, I will just briefly repeat everything you said. I think it was personally coming from a little different background than a lot of people here. I really enjoyed working with this group, and it was a learning experience for me. And also appreciate very much Natalie and the staff, and they sort of kept us honest and get us focused. And sometimes when you have a diverse committee like that, sometimes you may lose focus, and that I think they did a good job in doing that. And I do appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Tom, do you have any final words as we wrap
Well,
up?
I do, and I think we all in our hearts know that this was such an enjoyable experience with our diverse backgrounds and our working groups because of Dan, our chair, who was our leader throughout, our leader in the previous report on the future of science at EPA. We wish him all the best. We're sorry he couldn't be here with us today, and it was an honor to present the slides, but all the credit goes to great leadership on the part of our chair, a great committee, willing to spend lots of hours and lots of subcommittee meetings, and the amazing staff that made it all happen and kept us scheduled, because it's tough in the era of Zoom to have a great National Academy committee experience, but this was absolutely one. And we hope that, sometimes it's not as exciting as a specific pollutant or a controversial report, but it's so important to have the infrastructure to succeed in science. And hopefully that's the contribution. So I'll just finish with that. And thanks again, Dan. You're with us.
And thank you all for your time dedicated to working on this report, writing this report, and joining us today. Thank you for all of our attendees who are watching online. Like I said, a recording of this webinar will be available on the National Academies website shortly. That is all the time that we have for questions and for this webinar. Thank you all again for joining. Once you exit this webinar, you'll be redirected to the report page where you can download the report and see other supporting materials. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers again, and thank you all for joining us.